Everything from clothing to household items are getting more expensive each day. The world of fast fashion has complicated clothing production by shipping cheap parts around the world to whoever can sew them the cheapest. And now you, the consumer, are paying the price with rising costs. American Giant is about keeping things simple and close to home. They aren't affected by tariffs because their products never leave the U.S. Skip the tariff and snag yourself American-made clothing with American Giant. Get 20% off your first order when you use promo code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com. That's 20% off when you use code STAPLE20 at American-Giant.com.
Welcome back to the Basketball Show Deep Dive with Paul Sir as your host, and I am pleased to be joined by the Washington Post NBA savant, Ben Golliver. Ben, talking to me from Oklahoma City. How are you today?
I'm doing better than a couple days ago, Paul, because we had that tornado watch, which was a little unnerving. But really, It was just all about the thunderstorms last night in Game 1 against the Timberwolves, man. It was a very tense game, probably for the first half. And then when OKC wants to take off, they just leave you in the dust. I mean, that's the story of this playoff so far. You know, their point differential right now in the postseason is 14, which is absolutely off the charts. So every team going in against them, it's just like, can we avoid the blowout, right?
You know, that's so true. Can we avoid the blowout? Like, how do you keep it close? When you watch the Timberwolves in the first quarter, they got off to a good start, largely because Randall was hitting, deep three-pointers. They got off nicely, and then it started to equalize out. Margins were cut, close game at halftime. And then, like you said, how do you keep it close? How do you prevent the kind of surge that this Thunder team consistently has in the third quarter? That's the magic bullet. And so far, even though Denver admirably took them to 7 games, nobody's been able to really figure that out.
No, not at all. And I think Minnesota, they're really in the deep end already. I mean, the formula for trying to keep it close with Oklahoma City is you cannot turn the ball over, and you have to hope they miss threes. And, at the start of the game, Minnesota was mostly doing that. But the problem for the Timberwolves was they never got their offense on track. You mentioned Randall's, hot start, 20 points, 5 3-pointers in the first half. That was really a mirage because he's taking the deep threes. Those are shots that Oklahoma City is going to live with, and no one else is having any success. I went back and looked by quarter. Minnesota shot 38% in the first, 32% in the second, 32% in the third, 38% in the fourth. That just tells you nothing was easy all night long. When they're going back and looking at that tape, they're going to be glad Randall made those 3-pointers, but they're going to be saying, how the heck do we score the ball? We can't get anything done in the half court. And they also did not get out into transition themselves. So that's really where this series lies. Can Minnesota generate more offense to try to keep up with Oklahoma City? Now, defensively, I think the Timberwolves are going to be happy that they were able to limit the Thunder from taking a very high volume of 3-pointers. That's crucial because if the supporting cast guys are hitting their threes, OKC will just run you off the court. And in Game 1, they really weren't hitting a high volume of threes, although they were very efficient in the ones they made. But what I thought was the genius adjustment from Oklahoma City, and I think it's another key for this series, when they went small, Minnesota decided to go small as well, and Minnesota's small ball lineups could not protect the rim. And so what you saw with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams just getting a lot of easy jumpers, a lot of easy baskets going towards the rim, a lot of free throw attempts that had some people upset. There just wasn't that defensive integrity when Rudy Gobert was off the court for Minnesota. And so that's the challenge, right? I mean, you obviously want to create space and go smaller and try to get your offense going if you're the Timberwolves. But then if your defense falls apart and you've got just kind of that soft middle, Oklahoma City's going to beat you that way. And so that's why I come out of this first game. To me, the Thunder just look like a much more complete team and a much more disciplined team. And I think those are going to be the characteristics that determine this series.
I think that's really well summarized, Ben. I felt going into it that Minnesota was going to have a lot of trouble maintaining possessions because of the ball pressure that the Thunder put on. Edwards as great as he can be in moments, and of course last night he had the disadvantage of tweaking his ankle, and he's an amazing guy who seems to injure himself and then be able to run to the locker room and run back out and play somewhat effectively. But I knew that would rattle him because he is loose with his handle. And one of the things I think that Oklahoma City does to every team is they make them dribble more than they want to, because they apply so much pressure on the wings for the entry passes, even into the high post. And you end up dribbling the ball further from the basket for longer than you want to, while you've got these active hands and these guys that are very adept on help side defense, sneaking up behind you, and if not making an outright steal, deflecting the pass. The swarming nature, like I mentioned to you before we started talking on the recording, they're like a team of piranha that are just always trying to find a way to get at your carcass.
No doubt. Or those killer whales keep attacking boats, right? I mean, they're kind of like the orcas, right? Where they got you surrounded and they don't relent. There's no question about it. It's a personnel issue here, right? You look at Anthony Edwards, Julius Randle, and Rudy Gobert. None of those guys are trustworthy with the ball, right? I mean, they can make good things happen, but there's going to be a lot of turnovers. And Oklahoma City not only led the league in forcing turnovers, they led the league in taking care of the basketball too. If you look at the lead ball handlers for the Thunder, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Jalen Williams, those guys do not turn the ball over. You know, they are very careful, and sometimes they might settle for some tough mid-range shots, but that's about the worst you're going to get from that Thunder offense. They're not going to shoot themselves in the foot, and when you're trying to slow those big second half runs from Oklahoma City, the turnovers is what fuels them. We saw a bunch from Randall in game one. He really came back to earth in the second half. And Anthony Edwards just decided to give up in the second half. I thought there was way too much talk about the foul grifting stuff for Shai, and not nearly enough about Anthony Edwards deciding, I'm just going to become a passer. I'm not going to even shoot the ball. I'm just going to continue to feed it to guys who are clearly having off nights. Dante DiVincenzo, Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker. None of these guys can make a shot, and yet they just get to keep teeing up three after three after three after three because Edwards didn't want to put any pressure downhill on the paint. I thought it was a real miscalculation, and it actually showed a little bit of fear, in my opinion, from Edwards. Like, he didn't want to go into the paint because he was worried about all those piranhas you're talking about. And I thought that was so ironic because he started that game trying to send a message to Shai, right? It was like, cut out the funny business. He flips the ball on him after he's laying on the ground because he got fouled, basically trying to tell the guy, hey, stop flopping, just play basketball. He stood over Shai right before halftime, wouldn't let him get back up, shoves him in the chest. He's trying to physically challenge Shai, and Shai was completely unfazed by it. He made all the necessary adjustments in the second half, and Anthony Edwards, for all that bluster, he just fell apart and he disappeared in the second half, and that can't happen because Oklahoma City is deeper, because they're more disciplined, like we talked about, and because they have the better defense. Minnesota's only path to winning this series is Anthony Edwards being the best player on the court, and so far he's 0 for 1 in this series in checking that box.
Talking with Ben Golliver from the Washington Post here on the Deep Dive of the Basketball Show. I'm your host, Paul Sir. I agree with you. Now, Edwards showed, I think, signs of that in a couple of other games in the two previous playoff series where he does seem to get rattled at times, which is an interesting characteristic in a player that is so much about his bluster and his athleticism and his talent. Last night, I agree with you in the second half. He seemed overwhelmed, and I think the fact that his pocket was picked when he was trying to go by his man, and the help side defense is so outstanding by Oklahoma City. And the way they force turnovers, the variety of ways they force turnovers, you really have to be on edge the entire time. Here's something, though, that I think is interesting. Minnesota's bench was dreadful in shooting the basketball, just horrific. One of the stats I read is that they created 30 open threes last night. Now, created 30 open threes and not making many, if any, of those. Is that a sign of hope for Minnesota that they can create these threes, that if they get, if they even shot 30% from three last night, what were they, 15 for 51?
It was ugly. No, there's no question. They've had some duds in this postseason. They had one against Golden State. They had one against LA. And typically the Timberwolves duds are they just take a bunch of threes and miss them, right?
Yeah.
So there's a bunch of ways they can adjust. The easiest adjustment is you cross your fingers and shoot better, right? And
yes.
The Thunder will concede a lot of three-pointers. What they are completely focused on is we want to take away the paint because, they're a little bit undersized. They don't want Randall getting 35 points efficiently at the rim, which is what he was doing against the Golden State Warriors. It felt like, right? All those bulldozing drives where he gets the and ones and he gets the layups and he gets the dunks. That's the high efficiency stuff that Oklahoma City says, we're not going to give that to you. Anthony Edwards, free dunks and free drives to the rim, no chance. They want to take that away. They're willing to live and die with these Minnesota role players, and Minnesota has some really good role players. I mean, Naz Reid's been a sixth man of the year. Dante DiVincenzo's been a big-time player for a number of years, and they just did not show up in game one. So you can expect them to play better, and that should open things up a little bit as this series unfolds. But it goes back to this idea of who's the more complete team. If you're trying to live and die by that three-point shot, that doesn't give you very much margin for error, right? Especially when Oklahoma City has such a great home court advantage where they're going to tire you out so you get those heavy legs in the second half. I mean, is it really a surprise these guys can't hit a three-pointer after they're running up and down the court against the Thunder all game long? Like, it shouldn't surprise anybody, right? And, we saw some tweaks to the rotation from Finch. He added a player here, a player there to try to get some more wings on the court. He didn't play Gobert as much, so he was trying to match up a little bit. Like, I'm thinking about Jalen Clark. He got some minutes really for the first time in the entire playoffs. That wasn't garbage time. But the problem is the talent gap is just massive, right? Whoever that guy, he's not playing for a reason, Jalen Clark. And now he's going against this very well-refined Thunder rotation, which just comes at you in waves and has so many different guys who are better all-around players than he is. So that's why it goes back to that depth disadvantage. For Minnesota, their stars have to carry this, right? It has to be massive nights from Edwards. It has to be massive nights from Randall if you're going to be able to kind of change this formula against Oklahoma City. And it's possible. I mean, look, we've seen Edwards score 40-plus points in the playoffs multiple times over the last couple of years. Like, he is capable of explosive offensive showing. But what I think when I look at this OKC defense, I mean, guys like Dort, Jalen Williams, and especially Cason Wallace was impressive in game one. They are making Anthony Edwards work harder than he wants to work. He's used to be able to just go and buy that first point of attack guy like all the great stars, and he's starting to try to read the defense behind him, right? Against Oklahoma City, if you try to look past that first defensive, point of attack defender, they're going to pick your pocket and go the other way, right? And so he's going to really have to adjust to that type of pressure. He mentioned he needs to be shooting more, and he also mentioned he needs to be getting off the ball more so that it's not just him, trying to slice through all the piranhas as you described. And we'll see if they make those adjustments. But, a big factor here is this Gobert deal. He got into very early foul trouble and he really never got, back into the rhythm of the game. Finch decided to play smaller. And I think if there was anything to really be scared about, if you're a Timberwolves fan, obviously you're hoping to shoot the three better, but you have to play better defense with your small ball lineups, right? And Oklahoma City loves to go small. It was the key to their success against Denver. They're putting Caruso, a guard, a 6'4", 6'5" guard on Jokic. And when they go small, they can scramble you and increase that pace so fast. And your defense has to be able to cover a lot of ground, work hard, protect the paint, close out to shooters. And when Naz Reid was playing the five and they were going with their small lineups, Minnesota, it was just, it was too easy, way too easy for Oklahoma to score. And I think that's going to be something they have to try to figure out how to clean up. Otherwise, their option is we got to go big. We just got to stick with Gobert, try to slow the series down, try to junk it up, try to take away the rim from Shai and turn him into a jump shooter. Those are kind of your choices, and neither one's a great choice.
Well, they're not. And I, as I watched Shai knife through defenses, I thought that the Timberwolves actually did a really good job on him in the first half. In the second half, Shai became Shai, and especially when the T-Wolves went small. So I think the adjustments Finch makes in putting Gobert in situations where he can be more successful, like where he was catching the ball on the penetration from the Timberwolves was really awkward. I remember one time he caught it and he flipped it up behind him. He was trying to do some sort of 7'2" pirouette.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it was just
but
brutal.
Paul, do you even with his hands, do you even want him doing anything besides finishing lobs in this series? I mean, what are the odds he's going to get stripped anytime he has the ball, right?
Well, and that I think you've just hit on the key point. Is the T-Wolves, one of the things they do that drives me absolutely nuts, and I know that Finch is regarded as such a tremendous offensive coach, everything's off the dribble. Like there's so little off the pass that they actually get other than penetrate and kick to the three. And against the Thunder, you can't over dribble and beat these guys because they will pick your pocket. That's where I think, like to your point, at times they're going to have to see if they can slow it down and get the ball into Gobert in a position where he can just dunk the basketball or put it in around the rim or get to the free throw line, even though he's not a great free throw shooter. They've got to put pressure on Hartenstein when he's in the game, and they've got to be able, and if they go small, to your point, they have to just do a better job of rotating on defense. I watched the Timberwolves on defense and their defensive posture off ball. And the difference between them and the Thunder is they're just worlds apart. The Thunder are active in defensive stance. The Timberwolves are standing upright with their hands at their sides and they're getting blown by. And that's why they get carved up.
You know, and it could be one of those things where Oklahoma City comes off this amazing series against Denver where they were forced to play as hard as possible. And Minnesota had a pretty easy path through the playoffs, right? Like they took care of the Lakers very quickly. They took care of the Warriors without Steph Curry very quickly. I don't know if it made them overconfident, but I do think there's an adjustment period where you really have to crank up to the seriously high intensity basketball. And Minnesota, like you said, wasn't quite there. I think there's another big problem with Minnesota, though, when they go small. And it really doesn't have anything to do with protecting the rim like I was describing earlier. The problem is when they're small, they're really small. Mike Conley, Dante DiVincenzo, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, all of those guys are giving up size at their position. Yeah. Pretty much anytime they're on the court against Oklahoma City, because those piranhas you've described typically are incredibly long and very physical, right? Caruso, Cason Wallace, Dort, all those guys are built like brick walls, very quick, very strong players. And so it's easy for them to just kind of gobble up these small Timberwolves guards. Again, that's why you have to go back to who are the physical players for Minnesota? Well, it's Edwards and Randall. Those guys have to be sensational to carry the day. I'm talking about averaging like 60, 65 points together if they're going to win this series, because I think that they have to just set a different tone. The other guy who did have some success early, who got into foul trouble, and so it kind of muted things, was Jaden McDaniels. He's an interesting X factor for the Timberwolves because he's so long. The problem is he's got to expend all this energy guarding Shai. That's a very frustrating and taxing job. And so he's another player, though, who could help loosen things up because he's got great physical tools. And if they do go small, he could be a player who really helps Minnesota. So that would be one X factor I would circle here as we try to figure out how Minnesota handles this thing. But yeah, I think in game 2, if I'm Finch, I might try to go back big, I might, because Gobert was doing a pretty good job of making people work on the glass, and he's always doing a good job protecting the rim. See if you can just really muck this game up, slow it down, get it ugly. Don't, do the stuff you were talking about in terms of feeding him the ball and letting him try to make moves and go through that. Cut all that stuff out and just say, all you are is a dunker. All you are is a putback guy now, and see if that's a way to win. I mean, because they hung tight for a half, right? And I think that's something that they can build off of. But the scary part is Oklahoma City adjusted so well in the second half to what they were doing defensively that I'm already a little concerned this series could get away from Minnesota.
For good reason. And I'm really curious, though, about this Minnesota team, because like you said, they started out both of their other series poorly. Now, Golden State loses Steph Curry. That changes everything. The Lakers, as we discovered, they had nothing in the middle. They had no answers for the size and length, and they certainly don't play defense like Oklahoma City. So it's ratcheting up the pace, being able to withstand the pressure. Now that they've had this opportunity, because looking back on the season, they did split with OKC. So there are some reasons to look here and say, you know what, there's hope, but we have to adjust to them. Oh, they have to be able to take care of the basketball better. I agree with you. They have to try to use their size and length to their advantage. But here's where I want to go with the final question on this series before we jump over to Indiana and the Knicks. Ben, James Harden drove everybody nuts, especially during his glory days, about drawing fouls. Would you say, now I have my opinion, but would you say Gilgeous-Alexander is similar from the standpoint of he's selling the contact and creating the illusion to officials that he's being fouled when he really isn't? Or is Shai just that good at initiating contact and finishing through contact, shooting through contact, that it forces the officials to call the fouls on the defender?
Well, I think he's so relentless that there's a little bit from column A, there's a little bit from column B, there's a little bit from any column you want, right? I mean, there's a lot of times where he doesn't get calls and he'll just fling something up at the rim and the crowd groans because they're like, come on, Shai, stop trying to bait here, just play basketball. And so I thought that the conversation afterwards, I understand why it becomes such a big deal because everybody's tuned in, but the fouls had no impact on the result of this game. You take 100%. Away all of Shai's free throws, right? And they still win by double digits. And I think his shot making in the second half, I think he was 8 for 14 in the second half after starting really slow. There were some incredibly tough shots that he was hitting, but that's what he is, a tough shot maker, right? And not only that, he brings it on the defensive end as well. He just flat out outplayed Anthony Edwards. And so, to me, I think if people are concerned about, all he does is flop, all he does is, bait for calls. Well, he also drove to the basket, I think, almost 30 times in game one, whereas Anthony Edwards barely crossed the 3-point line in the second half, right? And so there's going to be contact there. I think a lot of the whistles he gets are deserved. And I've been in road arenas where I see the fans screaming and yelling, why does he get this call? And they show the replay on the Jumbotron, and it's an obvious foul. Anyone would know,
he got fouled.
Yeah, it's just a clear foul. So that's why I think, there might be 3 or 4 calls every game that are truly worth disputing, right? But Julius Randle had 5 turnovers, right? So which one of those things is more important in determining who won this basketball game? All the focus is on the foul calls. None of the focus is on the turnovers. And I think that's really, kind of a disservice and a misunderstanding of the Thunder. But I'll tell you what. I kind of like how Shai and the Thunder get under everybody's nerves. They drive them crazy. They remind, because they're this younger team. I'm not sure. They're clearly not a millennial team, right? Like, I guess maybe they're Gen Alpha. I don't know where we would put them.
I don't know. Lost track.
But you know how it is with younger brothers, right? Or younger sisters, younger siblings. They always drive the older brothers and sisters nuts, right? Oh, why are you wearing that goofy outfit to school? Why are you doing this, that, and the other thing? And I just think it's the perfect way for like a torch to get passed here, right? Like there's supposed to be a little friction. There was friction when the Warriors came up and were shooting all the threes. Nobody liked that the first time around. So, that's why I say the complaints to me are more annoying than Shai's behavior. I think all the whining about the calls drives me crazier than whatever Shai does on the court.
And, the other thing I'll add about Shai, I appreciate his demeanor on the court so much, because if there is one thing that I find extremely annoying about the whole league is the constant badgering of officials on so many calls throughout the entire game by players on both teams. It's just the relentless whining in the NBA is not good for the viewer. That's number one. Shai doesn't put up much of a fuss. Like, correct. His demeanor out there is very stoic and businesslike and extremely focused. And unlike Harden, who I felt was an Academy Award winner for a lot of the fouls that were called on him on his penetration, I agree with you. Almost, not all, but almost all of the fouls are fouls because Shai is so good at initiating contact in the act of shooting and finishing through it, which forces the defender to commit a foul. So and the other thing I give Shai utmost credit for is the way he gets himself back into the offensive flow by using his mid-range game.
Yep.
It's not just shooting the three like we've talked about many times, Ben. It's not just shooting the three. It's not just getting to the rim. That magnificent mid-range game of his allows his Thunder team to only have to take 21 threes and still score 114 points, while Minnesota takes 51 and gets 88. So the efficiency that he has, that the Thunder have, and allowing that to be not just a part of, but an important part of their repertoire on offense is really admirable.
No question. I want to go back to your point about his comportment on the court, because I think it's a crucial one. Not only does he hardly ever really go at the referees, none of his teammates do. And you won't be surprised by that because they're not star level players, but that's discipline from the coaching staff, right? That's saying, hey, if you're going to get a technical foul or you're going to scream at an official, like, you're not going to get to play. I mean, clearly they have got those guys drilled. Now, Mark Daigneault, he will make some comments towards refs during games, but it's not over the top usually. If he's a very principled guy, so if he really feels like he was done wrong, he'll take a technical every once in a while, and then he will state his team's case in the post-game press conferences, right, or the pre-game press conferences. And I think that they've just decided this is how we're going to work with the referee apparatus, right? We're going to make our case when we're calm, when it's a formal media situation, everyone's going to be able to hear us. And then during the game, we're just going to play basketball, right? And if we get the calls, we don't get the calls, whatever, we move on. And, Chris Finch and the Timberwolves were whining about these calls from Shai all the way back in February, and they clearly came into that game annoyed. Like, they were preemptively annoyed by Shai, right? As soon as he gets fouled, Ant throws the ball at him, right? In the second quarter, Ant standing over the top of him. Jalen McDaniels is getting all these whistles. He winds up fouling out. He's incredibly frustrated, and it really got into their head. And Finch was like, we talked about it coming in. We've got to have the next play mentality. It's very difficult to flip that switch, right? If you start to think you're kind of, the victim, or you're being persecuted, or the refs are out to get you, it's really hard to break out of that mentality. And I would point to some of the very best players, Luka Doncic, Caitlin Clark. They take it too far, right? They get themselves distracted by all this referee stuff. I think there's a lot of very high level players who could learn from Shai. The most important thing to do is to be unfazed. If Anthony Edwards stands over you, you don't have to prove your manhood to him. You can just stand up and continue to play basketball, right? If he flips the ball at you, you don't have to go get up in his chest and scream at him and talk trash and, try to, prove that you're this macho guy. It's not necessary. Just go down and score the next time you get the basketball. Everyone's going to give you your credit, right? And these are some of the reasons, by the way, why we assume that Shai's going to be named MVP tonight, right? It's a big part of his game is his emotional temperament, the level-headedness, the poise. That's really what drives the Thunder. If they get down 10, they never panic, right? And if they get up 20, they're never satisfied. They just keep going. It's very hard to have that robotic type mentality. Very few players have it, but it is such an asset for this group.
I totally agree with you. And there was a point in the first half where Julian Randle was smiling because he just hit his third or fourth three. My first thought was, don't smile now. Smile after 48. It's a little early to be grinning, because these guys are just waiting to, tear your jugular out, and that's exactly what they did. Not a lot of grinning after the game. Let's jump over to the Indiana-New York Knicks series real quickly. And I'm talking to Ben Golliver, head NBA writer for the Washington Post, here on the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show. This is I find this to be an interesting playoff, to have three small market teams and the Knicks, who won their last championship when Nixon was president, squaring off against each other. Like, this is really, I think, a fun conference finals series in both the East and the West. Now you've got Indiana. Rick Carlisle is being called a savant. I know I think he's a classically trained pianist. He's kind of a Renaissance guy, longtime NBA coach. Really has the Pacers hitting on all cylinders. They've got a clutch player in Haliburton, who has hit some amazing game-winning shots. rivaling in some respects Jalen Brunson, the clutch player of the year, who is all of that and more, against a team in New York that has, I think, just kind of shocked everybody in the way they've handled the playoffs and the toughness that they've displayed, with a coach that, if they're up 40 with 2 minutes to go, is still reluctant to pull his starters in Tom Thibodeau. But talk about this matchup and how you think this is going to unfold, Ben.
Well, I've got the Pacers in this series, and so, that's a warning to the television executives. If we get Oklahoma City, Indiana, that might not be their favorite matchup. I'm sure Madison Avenue will be rooting for the Knicks, right?
Of course.
But the reason why I like Indiana, you kind of hinted at some of it. The lack of depth for New York concerns me, because we've seen the deeper teams typically across the board winning in this postseason, right? Yes. And Indiana is a very deep team. They just kind of remind me a little bit of a JV version of the Thunder, because they play so fast. Because
so true.
Well, Haliburton's not quite as good as Shai, but he's pretty darn good, right? And then they have a whole bunch of guys around him who can score, and a lot of guys who love to play defense, right? Like Aaron Nesmith would fit in perfectly with the Thunder, right? The way he plays, hard-nosed, a little bit chippy. Pascal Siakam's very athletic forward. Again, his length, it reminds you a little bit of what the Thunder value and prize. So there's some real parallels between those two teams. Also, Indiana has enjoyed an amazing home court advantage in this playoffs, just like the Knicks have. And I think that might be the real standout matchup of this series, is just going to be the vibes in the different arenas, right? I mean, you remember back in the 90s, I think they dubbed it Knicks versus Hicks. That's what they called it, right? And, obviously two very different places, but two very, very, very passionate fan bases who haven't won in a long time. You mentioned the Knicks haven't won since the Nixon era. The Pacers haven't won since they were in the ABA, right?
In the ABA, right?
Yeah. So that's quite a long wait for everybody. And when you walk around the Pacers building, they have a lot of murals up, and it just says like, "Hey, we made the finals once." That's kind of what the mural says. So they're thirsty, they're hungry, they're ready for something great to happen. In terms of some of the challenges or things to look at between these two teams, I think it's going to come down to pace. If Indiana is able to play as fast as they want, I don't think the Knicks players are going to be able to keep up and maintain their efficiency, right? Like Karl Anthony Towns, you can wear a player like him out. Josh Hart's already a shaky shooter, an amazing energy guy, hustle guy, but can you count on him if he's playing 48 minutes at a very, very up-tempo pace? And then with Brunson, he's kind of been banged up various points, and he wore down and got injured in last year's playoffs against the Pacers, right? So are you able to sort of break them down physically if you're the Pacers? I think that's going to be part of the strategy. And I think that if it's a longer series, that will really favor the Pacers, right? If the Knicks are going to do this, they need to win the first two games at home, seize control, and try to do it like in 5. Like, I think that's sort of their formula if they want to win this series. Otherwise, I think the Pacers' depth advantage is really going to play to their benefit. Now, one thing that needs to be mentioned on Indiana's side, they've probably been shooting better than they actually are as shooters. They got some really hot performances against the Cavaliers, and they just stunned that Cavaliers team because, they were more physical than Cleveland. And then they also just couldn't miss from 3 in a bunch of those games. And so if that goes cold, it looks different, right? It looks very different very quickly. So I think that's going to be sort of the key for Indiana, the supporting guys. Can they stay hot? If so, I think that they're going to be in the driver's seat. My pick here is going to be Pacers in 6. But I expect a really good series. And when they faced off in last year's playoffs, it was a really good series. And I think New York did a decent job in that series of playing it to their pace and their tempo. But I think Indiana's back. They're a little bit smarter. They're a little bit older, wiser, a little bit deeper. And I think they're going to be just too much to overcome for New York.
As I'm listening to you summarize it, and I'm thinking about this series in the Eastern Conference, and I also transferred over to the Western Conference, Ben. This is a real easy playoffs to enjoy, because the way you're describing the teams, and as last night watching these two teams duking it out, the hunger is really obvious this year in the NBA in the playoffs, and the teams that have emerged they have the kind of long-suffering hunger that you look for, I think, in a playoff where this really matters. And you've got historical possibilities here of teams. Yeah, I mean, like the only teams that have won championships here are the Pacers in the ABA and the Knicks a long, long time ago.
Right. And Timberwolves, an expansion franchise, never won it, and the Thunder have not won it since relocating from Oklahoma City. From Seattle, I should say, and then Seattle hadn't won it since the 70s, right? So, you're talking about 40 plus years, and all the main players too, Shai, Ant, Tyrese Haliburton, Jalen Brunson, those signature stars. One of those guys is going to have a championship, and he's going to get inducted to the club, right? Now you're a champion, and so it's all new blood here. I mean, that's really the exciting part about this Final Four is it's massive turnover, not only from last year's finals, but then also major turnover from expectations this year because Cleveland and Boston both went out early.
Really intriguing. Cleveland and Boston going out early, and just the disappointing storylines in both of those franchises. My gosh, talk about licking your wounds. Losing a player like Tatum tragically. Stuff happens. I mean, it's always the X factor in basketball.
Well,
Cleveland.
Paul, I heard a joke that the Eastern Conference is going to study abroad next year because Tatum's injured and Lillard's injured, so they're just going to take the year off. They're going to leave it to the West. And they're going to come back maybe as juniors and try again in 2027.
That's unfortunately that's not far off, is it? The West. Wow. Yeah. All the expectations going into the playoffs for those two franchises, Cleveland's historic unexpected year and Boston defending champions, everybody back, and to have it fizzle the way it did and set up this very unique Final Four. For me, it's great for the league. I know, like you said, Madison Avenue, not thrilled, but so what? It's this is what basketball is all about, and to see these small market teams build their franchises so well and get to this point, I just think bodes well for basketball in general. Before we go, Ben, I have to ask you about the WNBA's start. Last night, the Indiana Fever lost by 1 to Atlanta. I think Atlanta's 3-0 now. A little bit of controversy starting out with a quote-unquote hard foul on Caitlin Clark, some implications on some very uncomfortable stuff. Kind of a rocky start, to be honest, to the league. Like, again, talking about all the wrong stuff that I was hoping was going to go away after last year, when it seemed like the WNBA just wasn't ready for all the attention that was thrust on the league with Caitlin's entry into women's basketball, professional women's basketball. And now this year to have that right from the start, I'm a bit disappointed at that. And I'm hoping, though, that this is just going to evaporate and go away. Not that, I mean, if something really bad happened in terms of comments directed towards Angel Reese, then certainly consequences have to be there. But overall, I think it's just the wrong narrative because there's so much to be excited about in the WNBA, and that ain't it.
Well, one of the things that I stress on my podcast is we get to choose the topics that we talk about, right? Yes, and I'm with you. Social media has chosen an angle that I don't love when it comes to talking about the WNBA. And of course, there's underlying things within American society that drive those angles, pitting Caitlin Clark against Angel Reese in pretty negative fashion. But, I look back at that game, it's kind of like what we were talking about with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and then the foul baiting. Did that foul, Caitlin Clark's foul on Angel Reese, impact the result of that basketball game in any way? The Fever won by, 20, 30 points. Caitlin Clark had 35, thank you. She had a 20, 10, 10 triple-double. She looked absolutely incredible. Her team is much more well-coached this year compared to last year at the start of the season because they bring in Stephanie White, who really knows what she's talking about. Now, they looked pretty good at times in the second half against the Atlanta last night. They just dug themselves a big hole, couldn't hit free throws, and kind of screwed up their last out-of-bounds play and missed a crucial free throw late. But that was a very winnable game. I think my takeaway from this first week from the WNBA, the Fever, even though they're 1-1, I'm buying their stock. I think that they have a chance to really be one of the best teams left standing in the playoffs. They made some real roster upgrades over the offseason that they're going to want to continue to work those players in, DeWanna Bonner and so forth. Like, they really got to get her going. But Caitlin has raised her game. She's stronger. No one can guard her anymore. She's more confident. She's comfortable. She looks a lot like she did, even better version, frankly, in the second half of last season when she was arguably the best player in the league, right? So to me, the storyline coming out of that first game should have been the Indiana Fever announced their arrival as contenders, and Caitlin's making an MVP case. Those are the top two storylines coming out of Indiana. And instead, we had all that nonsense about that foul, which was a relatively normal basketball play. I had no problem with it being a flagrant, by the way. Go ahead, call that a flagrant, whatever. It's
Sure.
not a huge deal. But it's just not worth, 72 hours of various commentators tearing each other down and trying to tear the players down, right? So, I think, eventually, whether the dust settles or not, I'm choosing to ignore a lot of the nonsense. And I'm just focusing on the basketball, and she can really play. The team is better around her. It feels much more functional than the start of last season, where it just felt like she was thrown into a mess. And so I think, we're looking at a Final Four potentially of like Minnesota. They're always good, right? The Aces, they're always good. The Liberty are definitely going to be there. And I think there's a chance the Fever are that fourth team. And if that's the Final Four, that's going to be some high-level basketball by the time we get to the playoffs.
Totally agree with you. And when I look at the games that have been played, look at the quality of play, another step forward for the WNBA. And like you, that's what I want to focus on. I think Caitlin Clark is fantastic. And the fact that she wasn't talked about, and I really appreciate this, and I kind of put her in the same category as the discussion we had about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like, she complains too much. You made that point earlier.
Yeah.
But in terms of her on-court, taking care of business approach, she's the real deal. And took the off season, took herself out of the limelight, didn't go for the unrivaled league, just got stronger, got better. And her first two games, wow. She has elevated her game to another level, and with the better players around her, like you said it exactly right. I'm buying their stock too. This is a very good basketball team.
Well, you can always tell who put the offseason work in when who's got their jumper dialed in early in the season. And when she's drilling 30-footers off the dribble with a defender in her face in both games, she hit those shots, right? You're like, all right, well, we know she was living in the gym. And it's funny, too, because she goes to like every single Pacers game. When I went to one of the Pacers games, they showed her on the Jumbotron. And it was funny because the Pacers immediately went on a 10-0 run. So I was like, they got the Caitlin Clark karma. Clearly this is powering them, right? But I think she just lives in that gym. And that's what she's been doing for the last 6 months. And I think that work is really going to pay off in a big time way for her. And also for the Fever. I just like the mix they have around her. Aaliyah Boston, early candidate for most improved player. I thought she was good last year, but, not number one pick good. And she looked much better against Atlanta last night. It was just a shame she missed that free throw because it squandered just an incredible all-around game from her. So, I think the Fever's rebuild is ahead of schedule, and that's kind of what I'm choosing to take out of the first week. And I'm glad the league is back, though. I just felt like it was a long wait, even with Unrivaled, going from that playoffs where, Caitlin gets hit in the face in Connecticut, and, that's all the way back in September, waiting all the way until May. I mean, that's a long wait. Right, that's a long off season, so it's great to have her back.
It really is, and it's exciting. And it was great to see Becker's 10 points in her first game, 19 last night. Dallas isn't very good, but she's obviously stepping into the role similar a la Clark and many other players that have gone right from the NCAA into the WNBA season. It's such a bizarre short turnaround. But that bodes well as well. And it is great to have the WNBA back. And the level of plays going up. Now they're already talking about the next collective bargaining agreement. A lot of news that's going to come out, and I hope it stays primarily on what's going on the court and about the growth and development of the league, and less about the other stuff that serves as such a divider and a distraction between people rather than a builder on what should be a very, very special year, unparalleled historical year for the WNBA.
Well, my last thought would just be, Paige Beckers is good because after 2 games, all the fans want to trade Arike, their star, because they want to turn the team over to Paige. It's like, hey, we don't need somebody, just jacking up a bunch of jumpers and not making them and ball stopping. We want to play the Paige Beckers way. And that's, it could create some friction here in the short term, but ultimately long term, that's the best compliment you could pay a player, right? It's like, we want to build our team in your mold. And so it's no longer about Paige fitting in around Arike. It's more about, wow, after 2 games, this is Paige's team.
100%. Exciting. Well, Ben, thank you so much for spending time again today. I'm glad the tornado warnings are off in OKC. Enjoy the game tonight, and we'll catch up real soon, I'm sure, as the conference finals wind up over the next week and a half or so.
Yeah, something tells me, Paul, I'll be talking to you from Oklahoma City a couple more times during this playoff run. Something tells me I got that feeling.
I think you do. I think the feeling's right. Ben Golliver, lead NBA columnist for the Washington Post, joining me here on the Deep Dive on the Basketball Show.